Hello everybody, we have started recording and now hopefully you can all see the PowerPoint screen for the overview webinar for today. So just a reminder that I'm Marie, Marco's still here if we've got some questions. So just for some housekeeping, because I've got you on mute, what you need to do is just in the chat box on the side of your screen, is just type I've got a question and I'll be able to see who that is. I will then be able to unmute you and you can ask your question as we go, but there will obviously be time at the end to do so. So just I want to make sure that you can all see the PowerPoint presentation. If you can just let me know that you can see that, that would be awesome. Just in the chat box. Perfect, thank you, Gundagai. Alrighty, so today is really following on from what was probably 3 weeks ago or so, wasn't it? Our full-time presentation. So we're going to be covering just a couple of the bits that we covered last time and going into deeper. So thank you for those who asked some questions, which were basically around desktop auditing and also a couple of questions about the risk analysis. And so we will be following up on those today. But if you've got any others, feel free to just type in and we'll see how we go. So, replays, go for it. What am I doing, Marco? I need his IT skills. I'm not that. There we go. Alrighty. Thank you. Oh, yes, beautiful. So, just a reminder that the whole point of the audit is to initiate the audit, and that is what I understand is done through your organisation. Then conducting the document review or the desktop audit, and we're going to go into a lot more depth on that today. Getting ready for the on-site audit, conducting the on-site audit, preparing and distributing the audit report, finalising the audit then so that the people have had a chance to respond to the audit report, we complete the audit, and if need be, conduct audit follow-up. So let's go on to the desktop audit, and this is something that I understand that the team at Gundagai do the majority of. So the desktop audit, the purpose in all audit spheres is it's a high-level documentary review of the policies and the procedures. It's there to make sure that they have at least somewhere, even if it's in a locked filing cabinet, which often it is, got the policies and procedures and practices mapped out. They've implemented them, hopefully, and they've got some continuous improvement. Doesn't always work that way, but hopefully it does. It also means that the business has to keep the appropriate documentary proof. Now, one of the things that I'm sure the team in Gundagai do, and I certainly do every time when people send me the policies and procedures, one of the first things I look for is when was it last updated. So, lots of people buy policies and procedures off shelf. Oh, yes, you should be seeing the slides, Gundagai. Can you not see them?
No, they can.
Oh, you can? Sorry, Marco's fixed them up. So, what we need to do is ensuring, and as I understand from our last time that we were together, that you're about to have all the standards change. So you need to make sure that as the standards have changed, that people have updated their policies, even if it's just changed the date because they didn't need to do something because that part of the standard didn't change. But that's one of the earliest things. Version control and updating of policies will give you an idea. It might just be sloppy admin that they haven't changed the footer, but it often is that they haven't actually changed the document either. So this is appropriate documentary proof that they meet compliance to what they, well, at least on paper, they meet compliance. And if on paper they don't, potentially they don't in practice either. So the desktop audit is the thing that gives us an idea of what we should be looking for when we get down to being on site. So if someone's got the policies and procedures for a particular subsection, and I'm going to guess for you guys, let's think of OH&S, and they've got the policies and procedures for OH&S that look like they're meeting all the requirements, but they haven't updated anything on discrimination and bullying. which is certainly in the news at the moment, at least sexual discrimination is, and sexual harassment. If they haven't updated it, when you get on site, you want to see how they're putting it into practice. You also want to see whether, so it'll tell me if everything looks great on paper. When I get on site, I want to go, does anyone know where that lives? They say they have an evacuation process. Where do they keep the red and yellow helmets for the evacuation? Or can any staff member tell me where the evacuation spot is if we needed to evacuate? The meeting point. So all of those things will give you a guide to what to look for on site. Some, of course, have greater weight than others, but it's really important that you're able to follow up. Sorry. That's Marco just double checking to make sure you can hear everything on the phone as he wanders out the room. And so the desktop audit gives you a window. You often see absolutely perfect policies. And when you get on site, you find that most staff haven't ever read them or knew of their existence because they were in the locked cupboard. I'm not clear from you in your industry. Certainly I see a lot of what I would call cookie cutter policies, where a consultant has sold to a whole group of organisations the same set of policies and procedures. Fabulous. But if they haven't changed them, they haven't modified them to meet their client need or their facility, they really are quite useless. So the desktop audit is an inward-facing or first-party look that will give us the direction and the pointers to what to look for when we get out there. The tool that you use is really important. As I've said here, it's absolutely crucial. It's looking at reporting against the defined benchmarks. I don't know whether you ever do a word search of the policies. If there are some things that you absolutely have to see and you don't see it. So in an education perspective, it might be the withdrawal policy. I look at their enrolment policy and see if the word withdrawal comes up to tell me whether they're actually covering how someone withdraws. For you, there will be some keywords that you are looking for inside that policy. But it also means you actually have to read them. You can't just do a keyword search against the documents that they send. The tool that you use needs to rank in order of the most common non-compliance areas. So OH&S probably isn't the most common non-compliant area for you. It might be staff training. It might be medication updates. It might be marketing. Whatever it is that happens to be the one area, the areas that are most often not covered well, should be highlighted or focused upon in the general tool, as well as all the critical points that are required under the standards. Oops, there we go. So this is, I'm hoping, your current report. This is what we were given. So the standard of, is that the current report that you guys use? Okay. So we've actually unmuted you so you can actually talk back to me. I'm much better when I have an audience and I can see you or hear you. So this is this the current one? Yes, it is. Thanks, guys. So having a look at this, I'm actually going to say it's not perfect, but it's a good place to start. So, sorry, here we go. Was that my next one? Okay, I've misread one. But if you have the, so from that report, and there'll be more slides that follow on using it along the way, you ask them to send you a whole lot of policies and you say, yes, they submitted it or no, they didn't submit it. And then you actually read them and say, that's partially met, that's fully met, that's non-compliant. Is that the way it works? Yep, yep.
That's right, Murray.
Cool. And so when you're deciding, when you're reading the policy, what is it that you're looking for to decide whether they've met it or partially met?
Evidence.
Yeah, but you're not on site yet. So what are you looking for inside the policy?
Do they have procedures in place?
Yeah. Can you give me an example of one that people often don't meet?
Sterilisation.
Sterilisation. Okay, let's use sterilisation. So what are the key points that you're looking for in their sterilisation policy or procedure?
That they use tepid water to pre-clean, that they use low lifting or lint-free towel, that they have a process for maintenance, and a common procedure for pre-cleaning.
Cool. And so you would expect them to say, for example, let's use the towel, that the policy says that they must use lint-free or low-lint towel, and the procedure says where they get that from, and then all the person on site needs to do is make sure that they're using a brand that is that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Storage places.
Oh, and storage, yep. So with all of those, so you're looking at, you know your keywords, or at least the key things that you're looking for, and you're following through to say, is it there? Some things you might also want to see their sterilisation report over the last month to show how often they did it, what they did, and the results of those. And so from there, we're looking at the documents. We're also looking therefore at the records, be it the reporting that they have. It might be a sterilisation meeting. It might be a continuous improvement plan because something went wrong and they're trying to work out why. Do they ever do a supplier report? Do you ever, I couldn't see it in the standard report, to find out where they get their stock from or what happens when the supplier sends the wrong stock?
No.
Okay. In many industries, that's very common, that you would also audit not just the organisation that you're auditing, but their supply chain, or at least auditing their audits of the supply chain to find out what happens when you order powder-free gloves and they send you powdered gloves, for example. So what does the company do? Like, what is the policy when the stock that's delivered is wrong? Or the towels, lint-free, and they didn't send lint-free. They've sent you a replacement, and I've done the talking marks hand signal there. They've sent you a replacement like Coles do when you order your groceries online, and it's not always the same thing. Similar, but not the same, and doesn't meet the procedure. So what do they do about it? That kind of document review is really important depending on the industry that you're working in. So that would be one of my suggestions for in changing your report. What happens when they don't get sent the right stuff? Because you don't always, the supplier obviously doesn't have it. What do you go to another supplier? What do you do? Does that make sense? Or you're quiet, you can just type yes. Okay, so this is another page out of your report, your current report. So this is when you list all the things that you would expect the person to have and whether they provided them or not provided them. Saying they provided it is the first page, and it takes up an awful lot of your standard report. But then we get to the next section, which is the questionnaire and document review. So the guys and Gunda guy, this is the part that you complete. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So here's the indicator. You've determined partially met, and then you write your phrase. I only saw one of these, so I can't compare. Is the QAM comment, is it pretty cut and paste what your comment is, or is it quite individual against each set of documents that you're looking at, or for each practice that you're reviewing?
In an ideal world, that would be tailored to the individual practice, but at the present moment, they're very much templated comments.
It does depend, Marie, on how much effort the practice puts into though, because if they put a lot more detail, we'll comment on the detail, but if they just ticked it, clicked it, then we do much the same.
Okay. And that's a fairly standard response for a cookie cutter set of policies that have got no customization, they're just the standard, they've bought them from somewhere. And when you see that, you probably, do the guys who go out on site, they obviously get to see your report. Did the client see this report before the auditors go out on site?
Yes.
Yeah. That changes the way you write it too a little bit because it changes who your audience is. So by saying the surveyors will review the appointment system, in some ways we're giving the practice the chance to do something about it before the auditors get out there, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Do they often? Do they fix it?
Depends on the attitude of the practice.
Okay. So those who take it seriously will at least make an attempt.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So I found when I read this, and I've been sent one, and I don't know who the practice was, it was de-identified, but I found that I didn't, as an auditor, I go, okay, I just need to review the appointment system. It didn't tell me, like in that first comment, for example, we said it was partially met, but it doesn't tell me what you think is missing.
The reason we mark them as partially met, Mari, is that there is a component of on-site assessment, so we can't definitely say that it's met as part of the desktop auditing process.
Right. So I gather then that that's saying from on paper this looks fine, just make sure it's being done in practice.
Correct.
Okay. All right. That makes more sense. In my industry, we would have different comments. So it would be satisfactory as opposed to met compliance. So if the policy part was satisfactory, now you don't get compliance until we get to the end, and with the prac part or the on-site survey. So it's just a different use of language. From here, if there was something missing, if there really was something in 1.1a or 1.1b that was missing, would you actually state it? You would say that this looked a bit odd?
Yes, and it would be marked not met.
Okay. In the one that I was sent, there wasn't a single not met. They were all partially met or met, not met. Okay. There are many ways to skin a cat, so that's your way of doing it. This is another way that my girlfriend actually in the US sent me. So she audits medical practice because after our meeting I thought I need to get myself a little bit more into what the kind of forms that you use. So this is actually a form that she uses. So she's looking at aged care facilities mainly, so you can see from the thing here, you probably don't use much restraint in GP's offices, one would hope. But this is looking at against the restraint standard that they have, and yes, was it there? No, but it's detailed down. So when you're looking at, if I go back, can I go previous? So if we're looking at this first one, which is looking at the system for bookings and appointment system, do you have another checklist beside this that helps you break that down of what we're actually looking for within the booking system, or is it just as broad as this statement is?
There's some discussion about whether we do or not. There are some questions that help the practice identify whether or to give them the opportunity to explain how their system does it, but there's no checklist as such.
Okay. It's probably worth, as you improve your internal processes at QPA, so that you have a standardised for yourselves, this is what we are looking for, a little bit like this one, which is asking, is there a policy covering it? Yes. Where did they get that procedure from? Is responsibility defined in that procedure? Is it clear when it should be used and shouldn't be used, etc.? So that's how we define that the policy itself is meeting the standard. So we've broken the requirements down into doable questions, which is why I've used this example, so that you can see that they're very doable questions, so that whether it be Marco marking it or I marking it, it is clear that we're both looking at the same standards and we're both looking for the same key points to mark this this standard 1A the same way. So in some ways, it's getting an auditor reliability across, but it's also being able to have it so that we can see we're not missing something, and in some ways making the on-site that little bit easier, because if there is something missing, then we should be able to record it. Do you think that would be useful? Not sure?
No, we're not sure. The RACGP have some requirements around their policies and procedures, which we have to look at.
Yeah.
But generally, the majority of policy and procedure manuals that we see are templated manuals that come from one or two particular sources. So they're very similar.
Yep. And rarely modified, rarely contextualised for that practice?
Sometimes they don't even put their name in them.
Oh, awesome. That must bring a smile to your faces. For me, that's almost automatic non-compliance, because it means no one's actually read them. I do enjoy reading when I get to read policies, as I did last week. I was auditing for the state government, and I had an organisation that had obviously borrowed heavily their policies, and they had all the wrong organisations' names throughout. So they were RTO A and they all said RTO B, which was fabulous. So I was able to say they didn't have policies because they had nothing with their names through them. Yeah, but that's just, auditors getting pleasure out of making someone non-compliant, which we shouldn't, but sometimes it's nice. So just to remind, does that clarify the steps that did that meet the questions that you guys asked about what entailed in the desktop audit? So the more detail you can put into a desktop audit, the better aimed the actual on-site audit will be. Yeah, I would recommend that your organisation, QPA, has some standards of what you're looking for to make it easier so that you can check them off.
It's very difficult for us to do that because the new 5th edition standards that were only released last week are very outcomes focused. The college is moving away from telling people how to skin their cats and just asking to show the cat at the end.
Okay.
So it would be consultative if we were to tell them this is what you have to do.
Yep.
Instead, we need to be saying this is where you need to get to, and your steps in between need to be your steps.
Okay. So they need to show that they're actually getting to the steps in between.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what those steps are is up to each individual practice.
And so when does Standard 5 kick in properly?
Last week.
It's in effect now.
So it's in effect now. So every audit you do from now on is for against Standard 5. Yep.
We have a 12-month transitional period where we'll be auditing against the 4th and the 5th for 12 months.
Wow, that's exciting. I don't feel the joy in your voices, but I think that sounds awesome. Marco's smiling at me because he thinks I'm mad because I like policies too.
Yeah, I don't like being audited.
He doesn't like being audited either. So, okay, that aside, the questions that you asked from last session regarding that, have I covered the depth that you need to entail?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, excellent. So just a reminder, when we move on to the basic audit program, that we do the desktop audit, then the site audit, and then in standard audit practice outside of the QPA procedures is there's follow-up audits for anything that was picked up at either desktop and not rectified by the time we get to site audit. And so then we have the third system, which is the follow-up audit. So this is a slide from last time, as you may recall. Some of the questions that we were asked post our last session was around risk analysis and doing the risk matrix for the organisation, trying to work out which sections are of the highest risk to either general practice or to that particular practice. So remembering that risk analysis is the phase for which the risk has been identified, the type of risk and who or what will suffer from that risk, the probability of occurrence and the intensity of the impact, and then if preventative measures that can nullify, reduce the impact and or the occurrence of that risk. So it's coming up, having a look at each individual's risk matrix. When you're thinking about doing the risk matrix, and if you're going ahead and doing your the project for the assessments, you will need to do a risk matrix on someone or some organisation. You need to think about, and I'm happy in the project for it to be quite limited to one section, not the entire business. So talk about the activity that is likely to face those risks. Think about the likely risks associated with each of the activities and the description of what that risk is. So if we go back to your sterilisation, if one of the risks is the use of the wrong towels, the lint-free towels, how common is it, and what are the likely risks if they do use the wrong towel? Then the probability. So some of the gentlemen in the room last time were keen to have a definition of the probability. So having done a bit of research, it appears that the general industry standards are unlikely is less than 30% chance of it occurring, probable is 30 to 70% chance, and likely is greater than 70% chance of it occurring. So in the example of the use of lint-free towels, would you say that that was likely, probable, or unlikely?
Probable.
Probable, yeah. And so, therefore, you would do the analysis of if it's probable, what's the impact intensity? So, high, medium, or low. So, if it occurs, and it's fairly likely that it will at some point, is the impact intensity high, medium, or low?
High.
High, yeah. And so therefore, based on that, would we say that it's a high priority for the business to be watching or mid-range? So it's probable and high, so it probably will be a high priority. And therefore, what are they doing around those risks? So by doing that risk analysis of the sterilisation, we already know that we are very keen to look for then the policies to make sure that it doesn't happen and the policies and procedures around what happens if it does happen. Because it would be nice if we could say it didn't. So what are their mitigation strategies? So when you're looking at the sterilisation policy and procedure, do they ever include a mitigation strategy of what happens if the wrong towel has been used?
Usually there's a documented, if there's an error in the cycle, then it needs to be reprocessed, and they'll talk about the types of errors. Yeah.
Do they talk about, but then if we haven't got the control risk, so we've got nothing that tells me about what happens if the wrong stuff is ordered, for example, or the wrong stuff is delivered, that's a control. So one of the questions that you could be looking for is what controls do they have in place? And it might be stock control. So we never let it get down to less than 3 boxes or whatever. So that therefore, if the wrong order comes in, we've still got a bit of leeway before the next order comes. So it's looking at, do they have a mitigation strategy against something that is of a high risk? For a low risk, you wouldn't be looking for the documentation of a mitigation strategy necessarily, but certainly for a medium to high risk, we should be. And do they have any additional measures? What's the reporting function if something goes wrong? That is when we're leading towards catastrophic. Do we have a contingency plan if the basic measures fail to perform? a good policy should cover all of those, and good procedure and good reporting should cover all of that, at least on paper. Hopefully they never have to pull most of them in. So when we get to this table, which is the same one that you saw last time, we said before that it was possible or probable, and we said that it was at least moderate or major, but potentially you could say it's extreme when it comes to sterilisation. So those three levels: what is our mitigation strategy, what are our controls in place, how do we report it, and is all of that included in our standard policy and procedure? And if not, is it in practice reported, modified? So when on site, Gina, when you're out there, the staff may well be able to say to you, yes, this happened last week and this is what we did. Then obviously you would report that it would be really good if they modified their policy to do that, and made sure that everyone was aware of what was required. But certainly from a desktop, we can't tell whether they've got all of that in place if it's not written in the policy and procedure. Yep. You're quiet again.
Sorry, I muted you, Murray.
That's all right. You don't need to mute. I've left you all open, so because there's only the two of you. Well, two microphones that we're playing with, so it's all fine. So does that make sense? So that's helping us determine the level of importance we put when we're out on site, because we've determined that their policy didn't have the mitigation risks, it didn't talk about the controls, and therefore we need to ensure that somewhere that's covered when we're out on site.
Maria, a question for you.
Yeah.
When I create a risk assessment, a risk matrix for my business, of course I create a mitigation strategy.
Yeah.
And then I tend to assess the risk after the mitigation strategy. So my risk is, let's say it's high of something, my mitigation strategy is this one. And if I implement the mitigation strategy, that's still the risk that remains for the company. Yes. Is it something that normally organizations do?
Do the risk analysis after the mitigation strategy? No, not normally. You would hope that you've done it to be able to, in a mitigation strategy, to say that this now reduces our mitigation from, our risk from high down to low.
Right.
But you don't have to do the full analysis as a general rule.
Okay.
Yeah. But they need to have thought about it. One would hope. Yeah. Okay. Marco, what have you done to my trigger again?
Yeah.
He keeps fiddling with the mouse, guys, you see? And then I'm like, what are you doing?
I'm just making sure that they see the right thing.
Okay. Alrighty. So that leads us to the audit report. Excuse me. So from the way you write your audit reports, is the final report very different to the pre-survey report that I obviously had seen?
Very.
Very? In what way?
It basically reflects the surveyor's findings.
Yep.
There's not a lot of information that we add to it, only if it provides clarification around the surveyor's findings.
So if we keep following our sterilisation example, so the surveyor found that they verbally expressed a policy that showed how they worked around it. How would that be reported in the report?
Some policies are mandatory under the RACGP standards and some are not. So if it's a mandatory policy, then it gets listed as a non-conformity. If it's an aspirational policy, then it's listed as an opportunity for improvement.
Okay. And so, but if you were satisfied that they really covered it and it was all fine, you would just give it a tick and say conform.
It would still be reported on. You would say that at the time of the visit this happened, and then after the visit this happened.
Okay. But we never, in your current system that you play, you never then say, this didn't happen and we need to follow this up and come back at another time, or you guys need to do an internal audit to make sure that you are covering this in 6 months' time, or whatever the management action plan would say.
We don't have the decision to go back again. That's the decision of our independent committee that forms certification decisions.
Yes. Okay.
You would expect a practice to close out any non-conformities with corrective action before they're presented.
When you write your report, how do you send a copy to the practice to comment on it before it gets forwarded up the chain?
No.
So they don't get to see what you've decided at the end. It's only what you've talked about at the exit meeting.
They get a copy, but I suppose their input is not sought.
Oh, their input is not sought. Okay. What if they're upset by the report? So
we have an appeals process.
Okay, an appeals process. Okay. Under ISO and also under the education standards that I work in, people are given natural justice first. So they get a chance to say, I agree or disagree. The auditor missed this bit, whatever it was, and then put forward some information, which the accreditation body then would have a look at and go yes or no based on that response. And if that's not the way the system works, that's fine. But just so that you're clear that in many other organisations and under all other kinds of standards that you're auditing against, people are given that opportunity to comment. They don't get to change the report. They get to comment to say, I agree or disagree with that.
We have a process similar.
Yeah. And when does that come into being, though? If they don't get to comment, they just get to see what you've done.
They get the opportunity. So after a survey visit, they have, we have our own system that we work on. They have time to provide corrective action. If the surveyor has marked something as a non-conformity, they have time to address that and provide us corrective action. So we would close the non-conformity before the accreditation report is written and it gets presented to the ACN. So they do have time to address any non-conformities.
And so that's because based on what they heard at the exit meeting was a non-conformity?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Yeah. So in some ways that's still followed. So they do a corrective action based on them. So they've devised a management action plan, they do a corrective action, they send it to you. Hopefully it's before you've finished your report so you can close it and then send it off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's the time frame? How long have they got from the exit meeting?
They have 20 days, 20 business days, and we have 40 business days to write the report.
Okay. That's nice and generous. That's plenty of time. So from that audit report then, this is what we've just discussed in pretty graphics. So at the exit meeting, you've identified the deficiency. They then have to determine who is responsible to fix it. They determine the solutions. They allocate responsibility and the date for implementation. Really, they've got within the 20 days to do that. And then they send it to you, and as the auditor, you verify the implementation and effectiveness of that. Yep?
Yes.
Okay. And then that goes off to the accreditation board.
Yeah.
Yeah. Under ISO and also under the education standards, we don't require all corrective action to be done by the time the final report gets done. We require their management action plans, and then they're given usually up to 6 months to correct that. And then they have to notify us that they have, and then automatically under both ISO and under the education standards, the auditors then return. So you've told us that it will be finished by this time. You've said it's we either turn up at the 6 month mark or we turn up because you said you're finished if it's beforehand, and now show us. And that's their final chance to kind of show. But I guess that's the difference between dealing with someone's training procedures and dealing with someone who's playing with medical and impacting on people's health. So that would be the logic between the difference in that, both of which work. So we have been chatting now for 3/4 of an hour. Do you have any questions that I didn't cover in those slides?
When you talk about the ISO standards, are you referring to the ISO 9000, 9001?
Yes. So under ISO 9000 and 9001, that covers such a huge range of organisations. Excuse me. And they're very generic standards, the ISOs, but there are organisations across such a variety of industries that become accredited for that. So there's a standardised template of how the audit procedure goes with those.
The reason I ask is that we as an organisation have just recently become accredited to the ISO 17021 standard.
Oh, okay, yep.
But that doesn't mean that we audit against them, we audit against the RCGP standards.
Yes. So I will have to look up that standard because it's not one that I play on, but I would suggest that it may change some of the time frames that you require to work in, and things like because ISO is pretty prescriptive on the follow-up auditing requirements to allow someone to tick over and be made compliant. But I will double check that standard and I will give the stuff to Marco to send through. So can you tell me again, that was ISO 17021?
There are on-site annualised surveillance visits required under that standard. So that's something that we as an organisation have to work into our current program, which we're working on.
Yeah, and so that may well change just slightly some of what you're doing. And that gives everyone a chance to do the follow-up, which is, I think it came across the other day that I was surprised that you didn't have that as an automatic flow through. So that would cover those. I do the odd ISO 9001 audit. It's not, and I'm never a lead auditor on that, I must say. I'm always one of the junior auditors following behind. And so I just tend to get allocated and do the bit that I do. But certainly I've been involved in audits against some aged care providers, some manufacturing and some education providers, all three doing ISO 9001.
Would you have any tips for our staff when you were talking about the detail in which you review policies and procedures? That's something that we probably don't do at the moment because not a lot of the policies are essential under the RACGP standards. Do you have any tips for our staff who are doing those desktop audits other than the checklist in relation to working out, you know, what should be included perhaps in a non-essential policy or things like that?
Yep. Certainly in the essential policy, I would strongly recommend the checklists that are actionable and not just word searching stuff to say, do they talk about. For the non-essential, it comes down to a moderated team approach so that we want to make sure that everyone's looking for the same stuff. And we want to make sure that sterilisation is probably an essential one. Can you give me an example of one of the non-essential policies? HR, okay. So in the HR policy, it may well talk about, so you might suggest things like a good HR policy would cover the minimum experience of people before they're employed in particular roles. It may talk about reference checking. It may talk about verification of qualifications. It may talk about documentation retention. It may talk about the privacy laws. It may talk about the discrimination and harassment and bullying processes that often come in under HR. It may talk about reprimanding and staff appeals. It may talk about privacy. And so all of those things would be key parts of the HR policy that you would expect to see. Recruitment processes too. So all of those are key. So although it's not a formal checklist with we want to see down to this level, it's a good policy has these in it. So therefore, we all agree that that's what is in a good policy. Therefore, this is missing. And it might be that they don't talk about harassment and bullying. And you would say there's a suggestion that, you know, for continuous improvement that you cover this within the workplace. It would be, but again, it has to be moderated amongst all of your team so that everyone's looking for the same thing. Anything else, guys? Oh, position descriptions for each role, absolutely, Gina.
In the policy.
I would have thought that the policy would say that there are position descriptions for each role, and that you would actually, because it would be pretty sad if you didn't see them. So my last slide is just a reminder for your assessments. Oh, sorry.
One more thing, sorry. When conducting desktop audits, something that I always look for is consistency of the wording used. So what you will find out is that many organizations, I'm not an expert of general practices, so, but definitely in education and manufacturing and many other organizations I ended up auditing, policies and procedures have been written over time by different people, and you can pick up whether they are something that are actually used within the organization or just something that they show us when we go for audit by looking at the keywords and looking at the terms that they use.
So you can certainly tell the tone of voice whether it's consistent.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, and it's something that you can verify also after that when you actually run your visit audit. Because if the policies use specific terms that people never use within the company, you can tell that that's just a pretty piece of paper, and likely is not shared and likely is not followed. So you have an HR policy, and then you have a bullying harassment policy, and then you have an inclusivity policy, and they all use different terms to describe the employee. Okay, likely the three people that wrote it never spoke to each other, and probably the people that should use it never saw those policies. That's my experience.
I would agree. Very much so. And especially if they bought them, and that's what I refer to as cookie cutter. So they bought them from 3 different consultants and potentially just been put away in the filing cabinet. Yeah. So just before we go, just a reminder, you don't have to do assessments, but if you do, you've got the 3 knowledge-based sets of questions and you've got the project. Now, Marco and I have toyed around, and I know there's been some bouncing back and forth about a due date. To be honest, if you haven't handed them in to us by almost the end of December,
I'll send a follow-up.
Don't leave it too long, because you won't get to it. There's no such thing as a quiet time over the holidays. You won't get to it.
And just to answer the question before that Gina had about one specific assessment, we did find what the loophole was.
Do we need to go back to it? Yep.
Yeah, if you could, just for a second. I'm happy to try.
Yep, you drive. It's his computer. I'll let him drive. He's much faster at it than I am.
Problem.
Here we go.
So, should be able to see it in a second. As soon as I can find where my mouse is pointing.
We've got a screen conflict. There we go.
No, they should be able to see it.
So can you all see the assessment there for 304?
You will.
504, sorry.
You will in a second.
Yep.
Beautiful, fantastic. So when we look at question number 2, where it says, when writing audit reports, it is of paramount importance to use the right nomenclature and jargon. I simply, and apologies, missed the final sentence. We should have said, what is the term that better describe this sentence? So, for example, if we look at the first one, provide information which deals with opinions, attitude, and behavior. There is one term that better than others describes the sentence, which, spoiler alert, is qualitative data. So what we are trying to find out here is what sort of term better describe the sentence. Does it make any sense? So it doesn't belong to question number 1.
So it shouldn't have that. The second column's got the wrong heading over.
Correct. So we missed one sentence and we put the wrong header. My best advice is disregard it for a second. As soon as the webinar finishes, I'll send an updated version of this.
Okay?
Okay.
Yep.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, it didn't make sense to me when I saw it. I thought, okay, what did I do? And now I understand what I've done.
So all we can recommend is that if you are going to do your assessments, get started on them. Send them through to us as soon as you can so that we've got a chance to give you some feedback. And if you've got any questions that haven't been covered by today, nor covered with these assessments, please just send them through. We're more than happy to help you get through this, and hopefully it's made a difference to your practice. And it's been lovely having you all involved today.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.